said that we are interested in the business cycle of the economy. In other words, we're interested in whether the economy is producing at the potential level of output, below the potential level of output, or above potential level of output. Okay? And that's something we're interested in because we want to find out how, as policy makers, we need to move policy. If the economy is producing above its level of potential level of output, the economy might be overheating, and we want to slow down the economy. If the economy is producing below its potential, we want to push the economy, we want to support the economy, and we can do that by monetary policy and fiscal. To be able to do a good job of supporting the economy or slowing down the economy, we need data. Data is sometimes not available at high frequencies. For example, we're interested in the output is at the aggregate level of the economy, but output on data, data on output is not produced. For example, in the case of Vietnam, we don't even have quarterly data on real GDP from a demand side. We have data from a supply side, but economic management is all about managing economic demand. Right? So if you don't have data on a quarterly basis on demand, what do we do? Well, we made some numbers up, but that's one. In the case of advanced economies, a lot of data is produced at high frequencies for a variety of variables. And that helps the Federal Reserve, for example, make decisions about whether to raise the policy rate, lower the policy rate, or keep the policy rate unchanged. Okay. These data are not just about today. Some of these data are about the future. For example, there are a lot of financial instruments in the US which are related to future inflation. Some of these things you might have seen in your other courses. I don't know whether Dr. Ha has talked to you about the operations of Federal Reserve. Maybe he has, maybe he's not. So the Federal Reserve looks at a very large amount of data for today, for the future, and the past to try to get an understanding of where the economy is and where the economy might be going. You know that if you take a policy action today, it will not have an impact immediately. It will take some time for that policy action to have an impact. If you change the policy rate today, it will take some time for that to show up in the interest rates of the banks. Okay? And once it shows up in the interest rate of the banks, it will then show up in the decisions of private agents who are trying to borrow money, so on and so forth. So there is a lag between when a policy action is taken and when the impact of that policy action is actually seen in the economy in terms of consumption and investment. So given that there are these lags, given that we don't have very high frequency data on GDP as a whole, but we do have different components of GDP that are collected by advanced economies. In the case of Vietnam, I'll show you a couple of things that are available. That can be used to get a sense of where the economy is going. Okay. High frequency data, monthly data, is not. I'll show you some monthly data. Yeah.
Is it true that because in the development of technology, the impact of the policy is faster than us?
Good question. I don't know the answer. I don't think I've seen a paper in which they can measure. See, first of all, the impact of policy on the economy does not. Sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long. Like Milton Friedman, who was a very famous economist, said that the logs that the lags in monetary policy transmission are long and variable, which means that it takes a long time for the policy action of the central bank to show up in private decisions, and it may not always be 6 months. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes 5 months, sometimes 4 months, sometimes 3 months, sometimes it's 1 year. Okay? So given that that lag between when a policy action is taken and when it shows up in the economy, you don't know, you don't have a fixed number, maybe you can have an average number. Okay? And then you have to say, I take this average number for when 20 years ago, and I take an average number for today. And let's say then we have to measure technology. How does technology affect economic decision making? Once the policy rate is announced, most of the people who base their decisions already know. Okay? And very often the impact of the policy shows up even before the policy action is taken. That's what you call pricing in a particular policy action today. For example, in the case of the Fed, they publish their discussions. So the Fed will publish, the different governors of the Federal Reserve will say, I expect policy rate to be 25 basis points higher or lower in the next 6 months. And if many of them are saying that I expect the policy rate to be 25 basis points higher tomorrow, and that is published information, people can start acting on that information today. So the impact of policy, the impact of expected policy decisions can show up even before the policy action is taken. So because of the variable lags after the policy action is taken, and because of the fact that a policy action, if it's fully announced, may actually have an impact even before, how do you define what is the impact of the policy decision? What is the time lag? Because one is +6 and one is -3. So that's one complication in terms of measuring the distance between when a policy action is taken, when it's announced, and when its impact is. Now the question that you're asking, what do you mean by improvements in technology?
For example, we have information. I mean the agent, not the information.
Faster than before.
Yeah, their generation. For example, before we don't have a telephone or internet.
Yeah, I mean, logically speaking, those lags should have gone down, right? Because the information travels very quickly, and everybody knows what has happened, what the policy action is, and they take decisions very quickly after that. So when there was no telephone, you had to send a letter to somebody saying that the central bank has changed its policy rate from 8% to 10%. And that letter, the letter reaches that person 3 months later. Right? So the action will definitely not happen before 3 months. So in that sense, basically, maybe yes, I think you're right. But the fact that information now travels much faster. Secondly, it's available to a lot more people. Right? When you didn't have these technologies, you don't have internet, the information from the US goes to East Asia slowly through news. Some people hear the news, some people don't hear the news. But now that you have the internet and a lot of people looking at the internet, that information travels much, much faster. So, I don't know, somebody needs to do some research. Maybe you need to write a paper and think about. Do an internet search. go to ChatGPT and say, is there any research on the impact of technology on economic decision making? Is the transmission of policy actions by the central bank faster with more advanced technology, something like that? ChatGPT has to give you some kind of an answer. Okay? So, so now some variables in the economy move with the business cycle. Some variables move before the business cycle, and some variables move after the business cycle. After business cycle in the sense that they reach the peak after output has reached a peak. We're defining the business cycle in terms of the ups and downs in output. Okay? So variables that move in the same direction as GDP are called pro-cyclical.
Pro-cyclical. Counter-cyclical.
So let's say we define the distance from the, so let's say this is potential output and this is the business cycle, right? So this is the path of output. If a variable, so this is output, total output. If there's a variable that moves with the business cycle in the sense that it goes up when output goes up, and goes down when output goes down, then that variable will sort of move like this, right?
Yeah.
So this is a variable that moves with the business cycle, and so this is pro-cyclical.
Yeah.
Right? If this variable peaks before the business cycle, right? It's pro-cyclical, but at the same time, it is leading the business cycle. So the peak in this variable comes before, and the bottom in this variable, let's say, comes here. Okay, so before the economy hits the bottom, this variable hits the bottom. So this variable is leading the business cycle. So this one is pro-cyclical and leading. But if this variable peaks after the business cycle, right, it moves in the same direction, but its top comes after the business cycle. So if this variable moves with the business cycle up and down, but comes to the top after the business cycle, and reaches its bottom after the business cycle, right? So it's the bottom of this variable is here, and the top of this variable is here. This variable is pro-cyclical, it is moving with the cycle. So this one is pro-cyclical. But it is behind the business cycle, or it's lagging the business cycle. If there is a variable that moves just about the same as the business cycle, so let's say there's another variable, third one, that reaches its peak with the business cycle, find this bottom roughly at the time of the business cycle, then this is also pro-cyclical because it's moving with the cycle.
Consider.
And it's happening at the same time. So it is incidence means happening, and coincidence means that it's happening at the same time as the business cycle. So this is the bottom, this is the top, and for the other one, this is the top, and this is the okay. So if this variable is something that you could find some information on, right? It may tell you that the output is about to peak and is about to come down. So if you had some information on a variable like a leading indicator, right? And this, so every time the economy is going up, it's going up, but its peak comes before this peak, then it can give you some indication of whether the economy has reached the top and is about to come down. Okay. And here on this side, if this variable reaches a bottom and begins to go up, then it can give you some information that the economy is going down, but it may be the case that the economy is bottoming out because this leading indicator is telling you comes somewhat before. Now these are never exact because the way the economy goes up and down is not the same every time. Right? Sometimes the economy might go up a lot, it might go down a lot, sometimes the peak might be for a long period of time, there might be a very shallow recession and the economy comes up very quickly. So because the business cycle does not happen in the same way again and again and again, but some of these indicators can give you some idea about what is happening in the economy. Similarly, there might be some variables which are, okay, so that's the case of pro-cyclical. But what if a variable moves in the opposite direction of output? So here is activity. And here is time. And here is the business cycle. What if this variable goes down when the output is going up and goes up when output is going down? So this variable would be something like this. Right? So when the think of what industrial production, roughly the same, we talk about, I'll give you some specific examples. This can also happen. A simple case might be when output goes up, employment goes up, but unemployment goes down. Right? Now, employment may go up before or after output goes up, so employment may be either a leading indicator, because firms think they have to produce more output, so they hire labor in advance. Or it may sometimes be the case that firms do not want to hire new labor, but they use the same labor extra hours, and if the output keeps increasing, then they hire more labor. So employment will go up. It can go up before output reaches a peak. It may go up at the same time as output reaches a peak, but it may go up after output reaches a peak. And by the same logic, if this is output, then this may be a variable like unemployment. This output moves in the opposite direction of the cycle, so this is counter-cyclical. And in this case, the peak happens at the same time and the bottom happens at the same time. So what would we call it?
Coincidence.
Coincidence. Okay. So that's the idea, that even though we may not have information about output on a high frequency basis, unemployment data comes out every month. Employment data comes out every month. Okay. We may be able to say which way output is going based on some of these indicators of output. And then we can do some kind of econometric estimation to find out what the relationship is, what the lags might be between these indicators and output specifically. So that's why we have different indicators in the economy that we can use to ask the question which way the economy is moving. If the variable moves in the same direction as output, we call it pro-cyclical. If it moves in a different direction, we call it counter-cyclical. And if it's counter to, opposite to the cycle. Okay? And then if it moves at the same time as the peak and the bottom, it's coincident. If the peak comes before the peak, yeah. If the bottom comes before the peak, then it's a leading counter-cyclical indicator. So we can use these kinds of indicators on a high frequency basis to say something about what is happening to the economy. So typically industrial production would be pro-cyclical because output is production, right? So if the industrial production goes up, it means production is going up, it means output is going up. So it's pro-cyclical, moves in the same direction as output, and at the same time, consumption, y is equal to c plus I plus x minus m. Right? So if output is going up, it's quite possible that consumption, the increase in output is taking place from the demand side, because consumption, but it may not necessarily be the case. But typically, so empirically this is the case, but it can happen that consumption can be going up before or after output going up. Because output going up has to first translate into higher incomes. The higher incomes then have to translate into higher consumption. Okay? So all of these things are, so there are indicators on the side of production, there are expenditure indicators. Why is business fixed investment a leading indicator? Because if you want higher output, you first have to set up the machinery to produce that output. Therefore, you would expect big machinery investment to move in the same direction as output and move a little bit before. Stock prices are again considered the leading indicator. You could do some analysis to see whether the stock prices in Hanoi and the Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange are a leading indicator of output in Vietnam or not. Stock price data is available every day. Industrial production is available for Vietnam on a monthly basis. You could ask the question, is industrial production in Vietnam pro-cyclical or counter-cyclical? It will by and large be, I think, pro-cyclical. I'm not sure. Is it coincident, leading or lagging indicator of GDP? And where would you find an index of industrial production for Vietnam? NSO. Everything is at the NSO. Okay. So if you go to the website of the NSO, okay, I just want to show you one or two. If you go to the website of the NSO, okay, it produces a lot of information. Okay. And under economy, we have industry, and we have the index of industrial production by activity. So let's look at the index of industrial production by industrial activity. You have a lot of data, but all of this data is on an annual basis. Right? We are looking for information on a high frequency basis. So you could first, So if you go to the main page of the NOS, you can see that there is something which says Industrial Production Index in August of 2025. And on the right hand side, you have an Excel file that can be downloaded. And when you open that Excel file, it will give you the Industrial Production Index for Vietnam month by month by month. Okay? So it might be interesting to do a little small project on, you have a whole bunch of these. You can take, you have real GDP data on a quarterly basis from the supply side. You have that. You can take the average of these three, right? And create a quarterly index of industrial production. Then ask the question whether the quarterly index of industrial production comes, what is the relationship between that and quarterly real GDP? And the answer basically should be, it happens at about the same time. So if you run a regression, the coefficient on the time period T on the right hand side should be very large. Large and significant. So I'm not going to do a whole lot more on the supply side, except to basically say that these high frequency indicators are available for industrial economies quite a bit, and quite a few of them are available, and a lot of analysis is done based on these indicators to say where the economy is recovering, the economy is slowing down. If the economy is recovering, then you can withdraw some stimulus from the economy. If the economy is slowing down, then you start need to providing some stimulus to the economy in terms of policy management. Okay. And we've done the application on the demand side, where we looked at components of demand, we made up all this data, and we discussed a little bit about how high frequency data is available and how it can be used to say something about which way the economy is going. Let me move on, start a little bit on, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to replace this lecture on Moodle because it picks up some of the other issues. We said that economic policy makers are interested in the economy in terms of stabilization. one of the important aspects of stabilization is stabilizing output. The second important aspect of stability is price stability. Okay. So let's look at price stability, the issue of price stability. The first thing that we need to do is, well, what is price stability? How do we measure inflation? Okay. Everybody knows how to measure inflation, so this should not be too much of a problem.
Easy, Philip Cuff.
And we are going to look at, so we need to measure inflation, we need to analyze inflation, and then we need to say something about what causes inflation. Some of that we already know. If the aggregate demand curve shifts out, output increases and prices rise, there are inflationary pressures. So a lot of aggregate demand will cause a lot of inflation. A lot of movement in the aggregate supply curve out will cause lower inflation. If the aggregate supply curve shifts in, there will be cost push inflationary pressures. Okay. We will look at some of the aspects of inflation for Vietnam. We'll examine different measures of inflation, and we'll explore tools and models that explain inflation. We'll see how much that will do. So the goal of economic stabilization is to have output as close to potential output as is possible for as much of the time. And the second objective is to keep inflation low and stable. There can be conflicts if the economy, if the policymaker tries to keep output as close as possible to potential output. Sometimes they might make mistakes, and if they make that mistake, they might be overheating the economy. If they are overheating the economy, then they will be generating inflationary pressures. And since we know that economic policy is not perfect, both in terms of design and implementation, how it affects the economy, these kind of mistakes can happen. Sometimes the government may withdraw stimulus, fiscal stimulus from the economy too soon, too much. So an economy which might already be struggling then begins to have a deeper recession. If it begins to have a deeper recession, there might be deflationary pressures in the economy as well. And the simple idea is that economic policy is trying to move the aggregate demand curve. And if the aggregate demand curve moves to the right, output increases, but price also increases. So you can have a situation where you are getting output, higher output, but you're also getting higher inflation along with it. Okay, simple situation. Policy is trying to move the demand curve, but as it tries to stabilize output or increase output, it also gets higher inflation. So that's demand side inflation, that's demand pull inflation, and on the other side we have cost push inflation. For example, if there is a global supply shock, if the price of oil in the global economy goes up, at the same price level it has become more expensive to produce, the same level of output is more expensive, the aggregate supply curve has shifted out, you get lower output and higher inflation. Tariffs by the US, where will that go in this framework? Is it a demand side shock for Vietnam? Is it a supply side shock for Vietnam? The US says it wants to raise demand side shock, but where? Exports. Okay. So we've said that aggregate demand So if there are tariffs that are placed by the US on Vietnamese exports, what happens? Tariffs leads to what? is that Vietnam goods are more expensive.
Mm.
In the US.
Mm.
If the price of Vietnamese goods in the US goes up, the demand for Vietnamese goods in
Go down.
the US and Europe should be going down. That is going down. Less demand, less production in Vietnam, less employment for them. More up. So how do we measure inflation? Inflation is defined as the rise in the general level of prices of goods and services in an economy over a period of time, either 1 month, 12 months, a quarter, so on and so forth. And that's positive, that's inflation, that's negative, that's deflation. Simple definitions. Why do we want to maintain low and stable inflation? Because inflation works on the economy through many, many channels. Okay? And typically when inflation is high, it also tends to be volatile. It changes a lot. And if prices are changing a lot, it becomes hard to make consumption and saving and investment decisions, and that uncertainty can bring down the level of activity in the economy.
Mm.
Okay. If inflation is high, then the Vietnamese dong in your pocket are losing value.
Depreciate.
It erodes the value of your assets. If it erodes the value of your assets, then if wealth and assets is a determinant of consumption,
Reduce wealth.
then this erosion in the value of assets would lead to reducing your consumption and activity. Another reason why, from a taxation standpoint, why is inflation a problem in the context of taxes?
Tax. High tax. Taxation.
Well, if inflation is high, then your, let's say you are a business and the prices of your goods are going up that you're selling. The amount that you're paying in taxes yesterday, when your price, let's say the price of something that you sell was 10,000 VAT, and you're paying a 10% VAT, so 10% of 10,000 is how much? 1,000. If inflation leads to the price of what you're selling become 20,000 VND, and the tax rate still remains 10%, how much are you paying in taxes?
20.
And unless the government reduces the tax rate, just because you're producing and selling the same thing at a higher price, the amount of tax that you might be paying increases. So your tax burden might be changing because of inflation, not because of anything that you're doing. What are the benefits of low and stable inflation? Well, everything that's a cost becomes a benefit at the other end. And in particular, interest rates, real and nominal interest rates will be much more stable when inflation is low. And low inflation also leads to expectations of lower inflation in the future. What is deflation and why we worry about it? Deflation is the opposite. What countries have had deflation? Japan, big problem. Why is that a problem? If you expect prices to decline tomorrow, you will not consume today, you will wait until tomorrow to buy. It's a postponement of consumption. If there is deflation, then your real interest rate is what? It's the nominal interest rate minus inflation or expected inflation. If expected inflation is negative, your real interest rate is high. And if your real interest rate becomes negative, it means that if you're lending money to somebody, you're not only lending money, but you're actually losing money by lending to them. You're not getting a positive rate of interest, but your earnings from your lending are negative. This is the pattern of inflation in the global economy, across different economies. Low-income countries, in particular African countries, have had high rates of inflation. Latin America used to have very high inflation, and then again seems to have had high inflation in the last few years. Advanced countries typically have low rates of inflation, but during COVID, you can see that everybody's inflation rate went up. So external shocks, systematic shocks can lead to. How do we measure prices and inflation? Well, we basically use the consumer price index, and the consumer price index measures what is called headline CPI inflation. There are other measures of inflation also that can be constructed once we have the headline inflation, and we are going to talk a little bit about what is called core inflation. At the same time, there are other measures of inflation that already we know from the national income accounts that there's a difference between nominal GDP and real GDP, and that difference is the GDP deflator. It is telling you the increase in the prices of goods and services produced by the economy during that time period. It covers a different set of goods. The GDP deflator covers all of the different components of demand, and we'll see in a second that the CPI index covers only a smaller basket of goods. In some countries, there is also a calculation of personal consumption expenditure deflator. We can calculate that for Vietnam on an annual basis because we have real consumption expenditures, we have nominal consumption expenditures, but we cannot do it on a high frequency basis. So what is a CPI index? It compares the cost of a fixed basket of goods and services purchased by consumers during the current period with the cost of an identical basket of goods and services in the base period. Okay? Notice the different parts of the definition. It is a fixed basket of goods and services that is being compared. How much does it cost to buy this fixed basket in this period versus some base period in the economy. And the CPI is also used to deflate many other variables in the economy. Just like to get the real interest rate and nominal interest rate, we take out the inflation from it. What is the formula for the CPI? You've seen this before? Yes? No? Maybe? I've seen it, I've not seen it. I don't care whether I've seen it before or not seen it before.
In our last course.
In the last lecture?
In the last course.
Last. Fine. What is this formula doing? This should be an equal to. It is an equal to. It's just looking like a dash. Why is it looking like a dash? On my screen it shows an equal to.
Equal.
This is equal to. Yeah.
This is so small.
It's equal to. So what is this formula doing? Okay? Look at this formula. What is the denominator? It's taking the ith good, the quantity of the ith good in time period 0, multiplying it by the price of the ith good in time period 0. And then it's summing over all the goods, right? And these are all the goods that are consumed by a representative consumer like you. Your shirts, your pants, your shoes, all of these things are here. We take all of these shoes, pants, and shirts that you consumed in a base time period, 0, multiply by the prices and add it up. So this is, what is this? This is your total spending in period 0. And what is the numerator? The numerator keeps the quantities the same as the base period, but then it takes the price in time period t, which is different from the base time period. So this is the base time period, and this is time period t. And sums it all up. Right? So this is the total spending in period t. Spending. It takes this spending, divides it by this spending, and multiplies it by 100. So in the base time period, this number is set to 100. And in time period t, whatever this number is. If this number is 105 in time period t, what it's saying is that your spending in time period t is 5% higher compared to your base time period on the same set of goods. Therefore, inflation or the general price level increase between these two time periods is 5%, and that's the inflation or the percentage change in prices, because the quantities are remaining the same. The prices of some things may have gone up, the prices of some things may have gone down, but on average, the price that you're paying for your bundle of consumption is 5% higher. Makes sense? Look at this statement here. It says price movements of goods and services represented CPI are weighted according to their relative importance of goods and services in the total expenditure of consumers. What does that statement mean? I mean, how is this statement related to this? I mean,
historical weight.
there are, where are the weights in here? There's something it says about weighted, but where are the weights in here?
Q0.
The quantity is not a weight. Quantity is just the quantity.
Between price and quantity of each good.
The what?
Price multiplied with quantity.
But that's the total spending. Where is the weight? The weight is supposed to be the share of something in something.
Divides by the total.
Divided by the total.
Yeah, the total of
Okay.
spending.
And where do you see that? How do I do that? Look at that. So this is my CPI. Is equal to sigma P I T Q I 0 divided by P I 0 divided by Q I 0 sigma. Correct? And leave out the i's. this is equal to I'm taking out the 100 also. Is this correct? Correct? Yeah. Is this equal to sigma pi t divided by p 0 pi 0 pi 0 q I 0? Is this correct? I just multiplied by 1. Correct? Yes. Because this is the sum of these kinds of things. I just take this out of here. Dividing everything by this, it was like this. I just made it like that. It's okay.
Or you can take it out because it's kind of comes
I
up.
no. This I can't take anything out because this is a variable. It has an I on it. I can't take it out.
I mean, it's inside the bucket.
No. This sigma is over I, so I can't take this out. That I can't. This is integrated. This is the summation over I to n, and this is the summation over I n. Look at this. What is this? This is the amount of money spent on the ith good in the base time period. This is the total amount of spending on the on all the goods. This is the share of spending on the ith good in the base time period. When I take all the shares and sum them over 1 to n, what will this number be equal to? Because if I sum all these, this is summation comes here, this is summation of this divided by summation of this, exactly equal to 1. This is the weight of the ith good in the consumption basket in the base time period. Right? This is the change in the price of the ith good between the base time period and the current time period. So these are price changes. These are the weights of the price changes. So the CPI inflation is nothing but the weighted average of the price changes between time period 0 and time period t of a basket of commodities consumed by a representative consumer. And does this statement now make sense? Since we are all very happy right now, we stop because it's making sense. If I start doing something more, okay. Let me see. I've already gone 5 minutes over. Okay. Let me do just 2 pictures. This is the CPI weights for the United States. What is the biggest component of consumption? What is the share? What do US households spend the most of their money on? Housing and utilities. If I showed you a picture like this for Vietnam, what would you say?
Food. housing and construction material.
A representative Vietnamese household still spends the largest amount of its budget on food and food stuff.
Nghèo
Okay.
cái gì?
So for Vietnam, this number for food is how much?
23.6.
Okay.
Nghèo mà.
Thì đã nói nước nghèo thì nó phải xài số tiền.
Vô trong cái nhu yếu phẩm đồ ăn.
Okay. Let me stop here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, once again, let me give you a little bit of an idea of what you want to do for your presentations. Today, you learned about how to assess the state of the economy in terms of its potential output gap, whether the economy is above or below potential. Okay, so you can start looking at some country, that's whatever you're interested in, and start collecting data. I would suggest that you pick one of the advanced economies. We are already doing Vietnam here, okay? And you will pick up some advanced economy. Quarterly data will be very easily available and be available for a long time period. Right? So do that. So collect real GDP data for your economy for a long enough time period. Let's say 2010 to 2023. You can use this file. Use the whichever aggregate demand. I think the aggregate supply file is fine. Put in the quarterly data for your country into that file, into the aggregate supply file, and do you know how to do seasonal adjustment of quarterly data using Python or Stata? Go to ChatGPT. Go to ChatGPT and say, give me the code for seasonally adjusting quarterly TV data for whatever country you use, whatever package you use. Wherever you have seasonally adjusted real GDP, do it in your statistical package and put it in there. Once you do those two things, once you put in your quarterly GDP data and you put in your quarterly seasonally adjusted GDP data, almost all the things that you've done up till now will happen automatically, right? Because in your aggregate supply file, all of the other columns are filled. Right? The HP filter, you might have to work on it a little bit again, but check again. The HP filter works in everybody's file now, so you might have to calculate so by the end of this week, you will know when your economy had a positive output gap, when it had a negative output gap. You will know that you will have three measures of the output gap from the deterministic trend. You will have the HP filter. You will not have the production function, but don't worry about that. Remember, in the aggregate supply file, we calculate the output gap using three methods. Since you don't have data on the capital stock, you don't have data on labor for your economy, you may not be able to calculate the potential output from the production function. Don't worry. Just use the HP filter. So by the time you come to this weekend, you will already have your indicators of potential output, or your HP filter indicators of potential output. And you'll be able to identify when the output gap is positive and when the output gap is negative. And next week on Tuesday, I will show you, once again, you'll have some files based on which you should be able to get some more data. So on Tuesday, I'll do the fiscal file and the monetary files. I'll finish this very quickly, and once you have those files all done, right, you will have to collect a few more series for the country that you're working on, and because the file is all with formulas, fiscal policies, monetary is expansionary or contractionary, the answer will drop out immediately for your country, and the Taylor rule on whether monetary policy was appropriate or not appropriate in your country based on your calculations should drop out of your calculations very quickly. Okay?
Mm.
So start collecting the data on your country.
Mm.
What groups are you in? That's group number 1, 2, 3. This is one group.
Yeah.
Which group are you in?
I'm with Mr. Moon.
Excellent.
He's not here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have 4 groups, and you're with. So we have 4 groups. We'll have 4 presentations, 20 to 25 minutes each. On next Friday.
Choose the different countries.
I mean, there are plenty of countries in the world. Choose a different country. Why not? What is it? Everybody wants to choose the same country?
I don't know, but I say we decide the country soon, maybe.
You can show me the country next Friday. You don't have to tell me the country today.
Okay.
You try one country, it doesn't work, try another country. You don't have to tell me the country until next Friday. Surprise me next Friday. All right? Okay. Have a good weekend.